The sound of flesh hitting wrestling mat echoed through Roosevelt High's empty gymnasium like a gunshot. Bailey Morrison's knees struck the blue vinyl with a sickening thud as three figures in red Letterman jackets loomed over her petite frame. Brett Chambers, 6'2" of pure quarterback arrogance, stepped forward with the kind of smile that had never known consequences. "Time to learn your place, scholarship trash," he sneered, his voice bouncing off the metal bleachers. Behind him, Tanner Walsh cracked his knuckles while Devin Cross pulled out his phone, already recording what they assumed would be another easy victory. But instead of cowering, instead of begging, Bailey Morrison did something that made the air in the gymnasium shift. She looked up at Brett, with eyes that held no fear, no panic, no desperation. Then she started counting. 5, 4, 3. Her voice was steady, measured, like someone timing a very important event. The three boys exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain why their victim was acting like she held all the cards. What happened next would become the most viral moment in Roosevelt High's history. But first, let me tell you why this story needs to be heard. If you've ever felt powerless against bullies, if you've ever wondered whether justice really exists, please hit that like button. Your support helps stories like Bailey's reach people who need to know they're not alone. And if you want to share where you're watching from, drop a comment below. Every voice matters in building a community where no one suffers in silence. Now, let's see what happens when predators pick the wrong prey. 3 hours earlier, Bailey had walked into fifth period PE with the same careful precision she brought to everything. At 17, she possessed the kind of understated presence that made teachers forget her name and classmates overlook her entirely. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her Roosevelt High t-shirt hung loose over her small frame, and her worn sneakers made no sound as she crossed the polished floor. What none of them noticed was how those sneakers showed tactical wear patterns on the soles, how her digital watch displayed encrypted messaging capabilities, how the small scar behind her left ear had been placed with surgical precision to accommodate something far more sophisticated than a typical teenager might need. Coach Williams barely glanced up from his clipboard as students filtered in for wrestling unit. "Pair up for basic takedown drills," he called out, his attention already drifting to his phone, where texts about weekend fishing plans demanded more focus than student safety. Brett Chambers surveyed the room like a predator selecting prey. As team captain of both football and wrestling, he'd spent 4 years establishing a hierarchy built on intimidation and family influence. His father's badge as county sheriff had smoothed over countless misunderstandings throughout high school, creating an armor of untouchability that Brett wore like a second skin. "Fresh meat," Tanner Walsh muttered, nodding toward Bailey, who was quietly stretching in the corner. At 6'1" and built like a linebacker, Tanner had spent his senior year as Brett's primary enforcer, using his wrestling skills to send messages to anyone who stepped out of line. Devin Cross, smaller but infinitely more dangerous with technology, was already composing social media posts designed to maximize humiliation. His fingers flew across his phone screen, setting up the live stream that would broadcast Bailey's expected defeat to their carefully curated audience of followers. "This'll be educational," Brett decided, his blue eyes lighting up with malicious anticipation. The three moved toward Bailey like sharks scenting blood, unaware they were swimming toward something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Bailey saw them coming before they'd taken their first step. Years of training had taught her to read body language, assess threats, and calculate outcomes with computer-like precision. She noted Brett's overconfident swagger, Tanner's reliance on brute strength, Devin's divided attention between her and his phone. Amateur hour. "Hey, new girl," Brett called out, though Bailey had been at Roosevelt for 8 months. "Want to learn some real wrestling?" She looked up with the kind of calm that should have been their first warning. "I'm listening." The gymnasium had emptied except for a handful of students who sensed drama brewing. Coach Williams had conveniently disappeared into his office, leaving the wrestling mats to become an unsupervised arena where power dynamics played out in their rawest form. "See, the thing about wrestling," Brett continued, circling Bailey like she was prey, "is that it's about dominance, strength, knowing who's on top." His words carried implications that made several watching students shift uncomfortably. Bailey's response was to check her watch. The digital display showed 4:27 p.m., but more importantly, it showed a small green light indicating active recording. Every word, every threat, every moment was being captured by sophisticated surveillance equipment that looked like ordinary teenage accessories. "Strength is important," she agreed quietly. "But technique usually wins." Tanner laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the gymnasium walls. "Technique? You weigh what, 110 pounds? I could bench press you for warm-up." "Probably," Bailey nodded, then tilted her head slightly. "Question, though. Do you know what Title IX Section 1681 says about hostile educational environments?" The three boys froze. Students didn't quote federal law. Students didn't speak with the kind of precise legal knowledge that suggested professional training. "What did you just say?" Brett demanded, his swagger faltering for the first time. "Single-party consent state 2, Bailey continued conversationally. "Means I can record this conversation without your permission. Interesting how that works." Devin's phone nearly slipped from his hands. "You're recording us?" Bailey's smile was small but sharp. "Motion activated since 3:47 p.m. Audio and video. Admissible in federal court under Evidence Rule 801. The gymnasium fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Brett's mind raced, trying to understand how a scholarship kid knew more about surveillance law than most adults. His father had taught him that knowledge was power, but he'd never encountered anyone who wielded it with such quiet confidence. "You think you're smart?" Brett's voice had taken on a harder edge. "You think knowing some legal terms makes you untouchable?" "Not untouchable," Bailey replied, "just prepared." That's when her encrypted phone buzzed. The sound was subtle, but the message on the screen was anything but. "Handler, package secured. Proceed to Phase 2. Bailey glanced at the text, her expression unreadable. Three boys who'd spent their lives getting everything they wanted through intimidation found themselves facing something they'd never encountered before. Someone who wasn't afraid of them. "Who was that?" Devin demanded, trying to lean close enough to see the screen. "Wrong question," Bailey said softly. "Better question is, who's been watching you for the past 8 months? The color drained from Brett's face. 8 months. That's how long Bailey had been at Roosevelt. How long they'd been building their latest scheme involving college admissions and buried assault reports. How long they'd assumed they were untouchable. "You don't know what you're messing with," Brett snarled, stepping closer. "My father's the sheriff. My family owns this town. We could destroy you with one phone call." Bailey reached into her gym bag and pulled out what looked like a standard recording device, except for the federal certification stamps visible on its casing. The specialized legal recording equipment used by law enforcement agencies had capabilities far beyond civilian devices, with encrypted digital timestamps, blockchain authentication, and forensic data recovery that courts accepted without question. "Actually," Bailey said, placing the device on the mat between them, "I'm counting on you trying. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation, every abuse of power gets added to a federal case file that's been building for longer than you know." The three boys stared at the device like it was a bomb. because in many ways, it was. Everything they'd said, everything they were about to do, was being recorded with equipment that could survive legal challenges all the way to the Supreme Court. Federal case file? Tanner's voice cracked. What federal case file? Bailey's phone buzzed again. This time she answered it on speaker, her voice professionally neutral. Morrison. Subject is secure. Came a voice that sounded nothing like a teenager's parent. Ready for extraction? Negative, Bailey replied, never taking her eyes off the three boys. Still gathering evidence on secondary targets. Brett's world tilted sideways. Morrison. FBI agent Morrison, who'd died in a car accident 9 months ago. Agent Morrison, who'd been investigating corruption in their county. Agent Morrison, who apparently had a daughter no one knew about. Holy cow, Devon whispered, backing away. You're Bailey Morrison, she confirmed, and you three just became evidence. The gymnasium door slammed open as more students poured in, drawn by rumors spreading through social media about a confrontation in the wrestling room. What they found was 3 of the school's most powerful bullies standing frozen while a scholarship girl calmly documented their crimes. But this was just the beginning. The real show was about to start. Brett's hands shook as the reality hit him like a freight train. Every conversation, every threat, every carefully orchestrated assault had been recorded by federal surveillance equipment. The scholarship girl they'd tormented for months wasn't their victim. She was their prosecutor. This is insane, Tanner muttered, backing toward the gymnasium exit. We need to get out of here. Too late, Bailey said calmly, checking her watch again. Building's been surrounded since 4:15 p.m. Standard FBI containment protocol. Devon's phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering across the wrestling mat. The sound echoed through the gymnasium like a death knell for their futures. Students continued streaming in, drawn by social media posts about drama in the wrestling room, but what they found was history in the making. Brett's mind raced through 8 months of carefully orchestrated crimes. The college admission payments totaling over $12 million. The assault cover-ups spanning 3 years. The network of corrupt officials stretching from local police to university administrators. His father had always told him that money and connections could solve any problem. But they'd never faced a federal investigation led by a dead agent's daughter. You want to know what your real problem is? Bailey continued, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made hardened criminals confess. It's not the recording equipment. It's not even the federal charges coming your way. She pulled out a tablet device that looked deceptively ordinary until she activated the legal documentation software. The digital evidence management platform used by law enforcement agencies worldwide allowed real-time synchronization with FBI databases, end-to-end encryption, and creation of tamper-proof chain of custody records accepted by federal courts. Every piece of evidence collected would have immediate legal validity. Your problem, Bailey said, entering data with practiced efficiency, is that you thought power came from your family names. Real power comes from justice. The gymnasium had filled with over 50 students now, all filming with their phones as the school's most feared bullies faced their reckoning. Someone had started a live stream that was gaining viewers by the hundreds, turning Roosevelt High's wrestling room into the epicenter of viral justice. Fine, Brett snarled, desperation making him dangerous. You want to play games? Let's settle this the old-fashioned way. He gestured toward the wrestling mats with theatrical bravado, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his reach. You think you're tough because you can quote laws and carry fancy equipment? Prove it. Wrestling match. You win. We publicly apologize and turn ourselves in. We win. And when I win, Bailey interrupted, her tone suggesting the outcome was predetermined. Brett's confidence flickered, but held. When? You mean if? But sure, we'll live stream the apology to the whole school. Deal, Bailey said, extending her hand. But we do this properly. Official wrestling rules, 3 separate matches, and yes, we live stream everything on the school's official social media accounts. The crowd erupted in excitement as word spread through digital channels. Within minutes, hundreds of students were watching online as Roosevelt High's wrestling room transformed into an arena of accountability. The 3 boys who'd terrorized the school for years faced off against a girl they'd dismissed as powerless. Coach Williams emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion, but one look at the federal recording equipment and the crowd of witnesses sent him retreating back behind his desk. Some battles weren't worth his pension. "Ladies first," Brett announced with false gallantry, gesturing for Bailey to choose her first opponent. Bailey studied the 3 boys with the calculating gaze of someone who'd been trained to assess threats by professionals. Tanner Walsh represented pure muscle and aggression. Devin Cross relied on technical knowledge, lacked physical conditioning. Brett Chambers combined athletic ability with years of wrestling experience and the desperate fury of someone whose entire world was collapsing. Tanner, she decided. Let's see what Stanford's $2 million scholarship looks like in action. The crowd gasped. $2 million? For a wrestling scholarship? Students began frantically Googling college admission costs, trying to understand the implications of what Bailey had just revealed. Tanner stepped onto the mat, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Actually, I do," Bailey replied, taking position across from him. "Bank transfer from Walsh Holdings to Stanford Athletic Department. March 15th, 2023. Account number ending in 7492. Federal wire fraud carries a 20-year sentence, by the way." The specificity of her knowledge hit Tanner like a physical blow. As they locked up in the opening position, his superior size and strength should have given him an overwhelming advantage. But Bailey moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd learned technique from the best instructors government training could provide. 15 seconds later, Tanner Walsh lay flat on his back, staring at the gymnasium ceiling while Bailey stood over him completely unruffled. The takedown had been textbook perfect, a combination of leverage, timing, and technical excellence that left no doubt about her training level. "Holy cow," someone whispered in the crowd. "She just destroyed him." Devin Cross stepped onto the mat next, his earlier confidence replaced by visible terror. The boy who'd made his reputation through digital intimidation found himself facing physical confrontation with no screens to hide behind. "MIT early admission," Bailey said conversationally as they squared off. $2.3 million. Your family's real estate holdings in Boston made it particularly easy to launder the payments through construction contracts. Devin lunged forward desperately, trying to end the match quickly, but Bailey sidestepped with dancer-like grace and used his momentum to send him flying across the mat. 20 seconds. Another perfect technical victory that demonstrated years of elite-level training. The live stream had exploded to over 10,000 viewers as students shared the footage across every social platform. Comments poured in from around the country as the story of the undercover agent's daughter taking down corruption went viral in real time. Brett Chambers stood alone now, facing the girl who'd systematically dismantled his empire. His face had gone pale, except for 2 spots of red on his cheeks that spoke to rage barely contained beneath a veneer of athletic composure. "Your turn, scholarship trash," he spat, reverting to the language of intimidation that had served him for years. Bailey didn't respond with words. Instead, she pulled out her FBI identification card and held it up for the cameras. The Federal Eagle gleamed under the gymnasium lights as thousands of viewers saw official confirmation of what they'd been witnessing. "Bailey Morrison, FBI junior operative," she announced to the crowd and the cameras. "Brett Chambers, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violation of federal civil rights statutes, and accessory to sexual assault." The gymnasium erupted in chaos as students realized they were witnessing an actual federal arrest. Brett's face went through several shades of disbelief before settling on pure fury. "You can't arrest me," he snarled. "I'm 18, you're 17. This is nonsense." Junior operative certification allows detention pending arrival of senior agents, Bailey replied calmly. "Standard procedure in ongoing federal investigations." As if summoned by her words, the gymnasium doors burst open and FBI agents in tactical gear poured in. Agent Sarah Chen led the team, her badge gleaming as she surveyed the scene with professional efficiency. "Subjects secured?" she asked Bailey. "3 subjects documented committing additional crimes on federal surveillance," Bailey reported. "Recommend immediate arrest, pending grand jury indictment." The transformation was stunning to witness. The quiet scholarship girl disappeared, replaced by a federal operative who spoke with the authority of years of training and the backing of the world's most powerful law enforcement agency. But Brett Chambers wasn't finished. 4 years of unchecked privilege and 18 years of never facing consequences had left him incapable of recognizing when he'd lost. As Agent Chen moved to place him in handcuffs, he made one final, desperate play for dominance. "Wait!" he called out to the crowd and cameras. "You want to see real power? Watch this!" He lunged toward Bailey with the kind of reckless aggression that comes from absolute desperation. For one brief moment, it looked like his size and strength might overwhelm her slight frame. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms worldwide. Bailey Morrison moved like water flowing around an obstacle. Brett's charge carried him past her as she stepped aside, grabbed his extended arm, and used a classic hip toss to send him flying through the air. He landed on the wrestling mat with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent gymnasium. But Bailey wasn't done. As Brett tried to get up, she applied a textbook wrestling pin that demonstrated complete technical mastery. Her knee pressed against his shoulder blade. Her grip controlled his wrist, and her positioning made escape impossible despite his size advantage. "Yield," she said quietly. "Never," Brett gasped, struggling against holds that had been perfected over years of professional training. "Then let me explain what happens next," Bailey said, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium. "Your father's been under federal surveillance for 18 months. Sheriff Chambers accepted payments totaling $4.7 million to cover up sexual assaults, falsify police reports, and facilitate the college admission scheme." Brett's struggles weakened as the full scope of his family's exposure became clear. "Principal Hawkins was arrested 20 minutes ago in his office," Bailey continued. "We found the financial records linking him to 47 fraudulent college admissions. The money trail leads to university officials in 12 states." Agent Chen approached with handcuffs, but Bailey held up a hand. "Coach Williams is being detained for accepting bribes to ignore assault reports. The school board members who facilitated the cover-ups are being arrested at their homes as we speak." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the full magnitude of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about 3 bullies. It was about a network of corruption that had poisoned an entire educational system. "But the real evidence," Bailey said, finally releasing Brett from the pin and allowing Agent Chen to cuff him, "comes from the 15 girls you and your friends assaulted. They're all talking now. Victims like Sarah Chen, A girl stepped forward from the crowd, her face streaked with tears, but her voice strong. "I was afraid to report what he did to me. But when I saw Bailey fighting back, I knew I could too." One by one, other girls joined Sarah. Students who'd been silenced by threats, intimidation, and the crushing weight of a system designed to protect their attackers. The crowd count grew as more victims found the courage to speak. The live stream viewer count had exploded past 2 million as the story spread across the internet. Hashtags like Justice for Survivors and FBI Undercover trended worldwide as people shared the footage of corruption being exposed in real time. Brett Chambers, once the most powerful student at Roosevelt High, was led away in handcuffs, while his victims finally had their voices heard. The wrestling match that was supposed to humiliate Bailey Morrison had instead become a catalyst for systemic change. But as the immediate chaos died down and FBI agents continued their work, Bailey's encrypted phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. "Seattle operation compromised. Package Charlie contaminated. Your location is blown." She looked up to see Agent Chen watching her with concern. "Problem?" Bailey showed her the message, and Chen's face went grim. "How many people knew you were here?" "Need-to-know basis only," Bailey replied, but her voice carried new tension. "Unless—" They both turned to look at the crowd of students still filming and posting on social media. In their triumph over local corruption, they'd created a digital footprint that could be traced by enemies far more dangerous than high school bullies. Agent Chen was already on her radio. "Command, we need immediate relocation for the asset. Cover may be blown." As FBI agents cleared the gymnasium, Bailey retrieved her gym bag from the wrestling mat. Inside, beneath surveillance equipment, lay a map marked with red dots across 12 states. Each dot represented a school district where similar corruption networks operated. Roosevelt High had been just the beginning. A phone camera caught the map for one crucial second before Bailey closed her bag. Sharp-eyed viewers immediately began analyzing the footage, identifying marked locations, realizing the true scope of what they'd witnessed. As Bailey walked toward the exit, she passed a woman in a gray suit watching with professional interest. Their eyes met briefly, and Bailey saw something chilling: recognition. The woman smiled slightly and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Bailey with the realization that some games never truly end. Agent Chen placed a protective hand on Bailey's shoulder. "Ready for what comes next?" Bailey looked back at Roosevelt High one final time, then at the map showing 11 more red dots, 11 more chances to honor her father's memory. "One down," she said quietly, 11 to go.